The call came at 3:47 a.m., the hour when even monsters sleep. Dimitri Kovač stared at the unknown number on his screen, and for reasons he couldn't name, he answered. "Sir," the voice trembled, "you were named as the father. Welcome to our channel. I drop new videos like this weekly, so subscribe and turn on notifications to keep up." Meanwhile, before we commence with our beautiful story for today, can you kindly let us know where you are watching from in the comments section? Thank you. Now, we can commence with our story. The cigar smoke curled like ghosts in the dim light of Dimitri's penthouse office. He sat motionless behind his mahogany desk, a king in a kingdom built on fear and favors, watching the city sprawl below him like conquered territory. At 43, his face carried the map of every ruthless decision, every bridge burned, every line crossed. His three-piece suit was immaculate. His hands were steady, but his eyes held the emptiness of a man who traded his humanity for an empire. He'd stopped sleeping years ago. Not because of nightmares, but because he'd become one. The shipment clears the harbor at dawn, Alexei, his second-in-command, reported from across the desk. No complications. Dimitri nodded, his gaze never leaving the window. Complications were for amateurs. He'd built his organization on the principle that every variable could be controlled, every risk calculated, every loose end tied. 22 months ago, he'd applied that same logic to his marriage. When Cassia gave him the ultimatum, the life or her, he chose the only thing he knew he could control. He hadn't seen her since the day she signed the papers, her hand shaking so violently she could barely hold the pen. The phone shattered the silence at 3:47 a.m. Dimitri stared at the unknown number. He never answered unknown numbers. But something in the hour, in the persistence of the ring, made him swipe accept. "Mr. Kovač." The voice was young, female, terrified. "This is Mercy General Hospital. I'm calling on behalf of a patient, Cassia Moreau. She's listed you as an emergency contact." His chest constricted. What happened? "She collapsed tonight. She's stable now, but," the nurse's voice cracked. "Sir, there's a child here. A little girl, 20 months old. The patient is her mother, and before she lost consciousness, she said, a pause. You were named as the father." The world tilted. Dimitri stood, the chair scraping against marble. "I'm on my way." Across the city, in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and fear, Cassia Moreau drifted in and out of consciousness. And fed clear liquid into her bruised arm. Her dark hair, once glossy, lay limp against the pillow. She'd lost weight, too much weight. Her olive skin had taken on a grayish pallor that made her look older than 38. But even now, even wrecked by exhaustion and whatever was consuming her from the inside, she was beautiful in the way broken things are beautiful. On the plastic chair beside her bed, a toddler slept. The child's face was pressed against the armrest, her tiny fist clutching a worn stuffed rabbit. She had her mother's dark curls and her father's sharp jawline. Her name was Mira, though Dimitri didn't know that yet. Cassia's eyes fluttered open. She turned her head, seeking her daughter, and relief flooded through her when she saw the small sleeping form. She'd held on long enough. That was all that mattered. She'd known for 3 months that the cancer was back. Stage 4 this time. Inoperable. She'd gone through the motions, the appointments, the second opinions, the devastated silences. But she'd made her choice. She would spend what time she had left with Mira, not in hospital beds chasing false hope. But tonight, her body had betrayed her. She'd collapsed while making dinner, and a neighbor had called 911. And now he was coming. The man she'd loved with a ferocity that almost destroyed her. The man she'd left to save herself. The man whose child she'd carried in secret, born 2 months after their divorce was finalized, raised alone because she'd convinced herself Mira deserved better than a father who loved power more than people. Cassia closed her eyes and felt the hot sting of tears. She'd been wrong about so many things. But she'd been right about one. Dimitri Kovač was a man who protected what belonged to him with savage devotion. And whether he knew it or not, Mira belonged to him. Dimitri moved through the hospital corridors like a shadow given form. Nurses stepped aside without being asked. Security nodded without checking credentials. Power had a gravity that bent everyone in its orbit, even here. But when he reached room 437 and saw the small sign on the door, Moreau C., his hand froze on the handle. He hadn't spoken her name aloud in 22 months. Hadn't let himself think it. But here it was, printed in clinical block letters, and suddenly he was 28 again, watching her laugh at something ridiculous he'd said, her whole face luminous with joy. He pushed the door open. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of monitors and the city lights filtering through the window. Cassia lay motionless in the bed, her chest rising and falling in shallow rhythms. She looked impossibly small beneath the white sheets, fragile in a way she'd never been before. But it was the child that stopped him cold. She sat on the chair now, awakened by his entrance. Wide eyes, his eyes, the peculiar gray-green that ran in his family, stared at him with the unflinching directness of toddlers. Her hair was a riot of dark curls, her pajamas printed with moons and stars. She held the stuffed rabbit against her chest like a shield. Dimitri couldn't breathe. He'd seen men die, had ordered deaths, had witnessed torture, betrayal, violence in its most primal forms. But nothing had prepared him for this, a 20-month-old child with his eyes looking at him like he was a stranger. Because he was. "Mama," the little girl whispered, her voice carrying the particular rasp of interrupted sleep. "She's sleeping, Malishka," Dimitri said, the endearment escaping before he could stop it. His voice sounded foreign to his own ears, soft, careful. The child studied him with unnerving intensity. "You big." Despite everything, his mouth twitched. "Yes." "What your name?" The question landed like a blade between his ribs. What was he supposed to say? "I'm your father? I'm the man your mother ran from? I'm the reason you've lived 20 months without knowing I existed?" "Dimitri," he managed. "Dimitri," she repeated, mangling it beautifully. Then, with the devastating simplicity of children, "You have sad eyes." He moved closer, his legs carrying him without permission. When he reached the bed, he looked down at Cassia, really looked at her, and saw what he'd been too shocked to notice before. The hollowness of her cheeks. The bruises on the back of her hand where IVs had been placed and removed. The medical bracelet with codes he didn't understand but instinctively feared. "What's wrong with her?" he asked the empty room. "She's sick, the little girl, Mira." He had to start thinking of her as Mira, said matter-of-factly. "She always sick now." Something in Dimitri's chest cracked open. He lowered himself onto the edge of Cassia's bed, his hand hovering over hers before finally, carefully settling there. Her skin was cold. "Cassia," he said quietly. "I'm here." Her eyes opened slowly, struggling to focus. When they finally found him, something complex flickered across her face. Fear, relief, regret, anger, all tangled together. "Dimitri." His name was barely a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question came out rougher than he intended. Her hand twitched beneath his. "Tell you what? That I was pregnant? That our daughter exists?" A bitter smile curved her lips. "You made your choice, Dimitri. You chose that life. I chose to protect her from it. By keeping her from me." Heat flared in his chest. "By raising her alone?" He stopped himself, aware of the small ears listening. "How long have you been sick?" Cassia's eyes slid away from his. "It doesn't matter." "The hell it doesn't." "Mama, the big man is loud," Mira said, her voice taking on a protective edge that shattered something in Dimitri. He looked at his daughter, God help him, and saw Cassia's defiance in those small features. "I'm sorry, Malishka. I didn't mean to scare you." "I'm not scared," Mira announced, jutting her chin up. "I brave like Mama." Dimitri turned back to Cassia. "How long?" She closed her eyes. 3 months since the diagnosis. But I've been feeling wrong for longer." "What kind of?" "Stage 4 pancreatic cancer." The words came out clinical, emotionless, inoperable. "The doctors gave me 6 months. Maybe less." The room tilted. Dimitri's hand tightened on hers involuntarily. No. There are treatments. Specialists. I can. I've seen the specialists. Cassia's voice was gentle now, infinitely sad. I've heard the options. I've made my choice. I want what time I have left to be with her, not in hospitals. Then why am I here? The question escaped before he could stop it, raw and desperate. Cassia's eyes opened again, and this time they held something that looked like surrender. Because when I collapsed tonight, all I could think was, what happens to her? What happens to Mira when I'm gone? A tear slid down her temple into her hair. I can't let her go to strangers, Dimitri. I can't. And despite everything, you're her father. The word hung in the air between them, enormous and impossible. Father. Dimitri looked at Mira, who was watching this exchange with the solemn attention of children who understand more than adults realize. Then he looked at Cassia, at the woman he'd loved and failed and lost. I don't know how to be a father, he said quietly. I know. Cassia's hand turned in his, gripping weakly. But you know how to protect what's yours. And she's yours, Dimitri. Whether you were ready for it or not. Whether I should have told you or not. She's yours. Mira climbed down from the chair and walked to Dimitri on unsteady toddler legs. She reached out and patted his knee with her small hand. You can learn, she said seriously. Mama says learning is good. And Dimitri Kovač, who commanded empires and inspired fear in grown men, looked down at this tiny person, this piece of himself he'd never known existed, and felt something he thought he'd killed long ago stir in his chest. Dimitri left the hospital at dawn with a dozen phone calls to make in a world that suddenly felt like it was built on sand. He sat in the back of his black Mercedes, Alexei behind the wheel, staring at his phone without seeing it. Boss. Alexei's voice was carefully neutral. Where to? The office. Dimitri's voice was mechanical. I need to think. But thinking was dangerous. Thinking meant confronting the reality that somewhere in the architecture of his carefully controlled life, a daughter had existed for 20 months. That Cassia had been dying for 3 months. That he'd been living like a king while they suffered in silence. No. Not silence. Cassia had made a choice. She'd kept Mira from him deliberately, systematically. She decided he wasn't worthy of knowing his own child existed. Anger was easier than grief. Dimitri held onto it like a lifeline. By noon, he'd made the calls. Private investigators to pull every record on Cassia's last 2 years. Lawyers to explore custody options. Doctors, the best oncologists money could buy, to review her case whether she wanted it or not. You can't force her into treatment, Alexei said carefully, setting an espresso on Dimitri's desk. Watch me. Boss. Alexei rarely challenged him, but there was something in his tone now. She left you because you tried to control everything, including her. Dimitri's hand clenched around the cup. She left because she didn't understand what I was building, what I was trying to protect. Did you ever ask her what she needed protecting from? The question landed too close to old wounds. Dimitri stood, crossed to the window. She needs medical care. The child needs stability. Those aren't philosophical questions, Alexei. They're facts. And what do you need? Dimitri didn't answer. Because the truth was too raw, too dangerous to speak aloud. What he needed was to turn back time. To be the man Cassia had fallen in love with before the organization consumed him. To have been there for Myra's birth, her first word, her first step. But time didn't bend for anyone. Not even him. His phone rang. The hospital. Mr. Kovač, this is Dr. Ramirez. Mrs. Moreau is asking for you. She wants to discuss arrangements for the child. Arrangements. The word made Mira sound like a business transaction. I'll be there in 20 minutes. When Dimitri returned to room 437, Cassia was sitting up, looking marginally stronger but no less ill. Mira was curled in the bed beside her, watching cartoons on a tablet with the volume low. Cassia's eyes met his, and he saw the wall go up immediately. She'd had time to think too. Time to remember why she'd left him. Time to regret her moment of weakness. We need to talk, she said. About logistics. Logistics. As if they were negotiating a business deal instead of discussing their daughter's future. I've already contacted lawyers, Dimitri said, his voice cooler than he intended. They're drawing up custody papers. You'll sign them, and I'll ensure Mira has everything she needs. Cassia's jaw tightened. I'm not signing anything until we establish ground rules. Ground rules. He almost laughed. You kept my daughter from me for 20 months, and now you want ground rules? Yes. Cassia's voice was steel-wrapped in exhaustion. Because I know you, Dimitri. You're already planning. Already trying to control every variable. But Mira isn't a variable. She's a person. I know that. Do you? Cassia shifted, wincing. Because the man I married thought love was something you could manage. That if he just planned perfectly, controlled enough, eliminated enough threats, everything would be safe. But life doesn't work that way. Love doesn't work that way. I kept you safe, Dimitri shot back. I kept everyone safe. You kept everyone at a distance. Cassia's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Including me. Especially me. You turned our home into a fortress and yourself into a stranger. So yes, I kept Mira from you. Because I couldn't watch you do to her what you did to us. Mira looked up from the tablet, her small face creased with worry. Mama? Why you crying? Cassia wiped her eyes quickly. I'm not, baby. Just tired. The big man make you sad? Dimitri felt each word like a physical blow. He knelt beside the bed, bringing himself to Mira's eye level. I don't want to make your mama sad. I want to help. Mira studied him with those unnerving gray-green eyes. Helping is when you make people happy. Not loud. From the mouths of children, brutal honesty. Dimitri looked back at Cassia. Tell me your ground rules. She took a shaky breath. Mira stays with me as long as I'm able to care for her. You can visit. You can be part of her life. But you don't make decisions without consulting me first. You don't bring your world into hers. And you don't try to override my choices about my own treatment. Your choices are killing you. My choices are mine to make. Cassia's voice was firm despite her weakness. I've lived in the shadow of your decisions long enough, Dimitri. I won't die there too. The words hung between them, sharp and final. Dimitri wanted to argue. Wanted to tell her she was being irrational, emotional, reckless with the time she had left. But looking at her now, at the exhausted dignity in her face, the fierce protectiveness even as her body failed her, he understood something he'd missed during their marriage. Control wasn't love. It was fear dressed up as protection. Okay, he said quietly. Your rules. For now. For now. Cassia's eyebrow raised. I'm not promising I won't try to save you, Cassia. I'm not capable of that kind of surrender. Something complicated flickered in her expression. Not quite hope, but not quite despair either. I know. It's who you are. Is that why you loved me? The question escaped before he could stop it, vulnerable in a way he hadn't allowed himself to be in years. Cassia looked at him for a long moment. I loved you because underneath the armor, there was a man who felt everything so deeply he thought he had to control the whole world to keep it from destroying him. Her voice softened. I left because I realized you'd forgotten that man existed. Mira yawned, the tension of the adult conversation wearing her down. Dimitri stay? She asked sleepily. Dimitri looked at his daughter, this miracle he didn't deserve, and made a choice that terrified him more than any enemy he'd ever faced. Yes, Malishka. I stay. The hospital discharged Cassia 3 days later with a list of medications, a visiting nurse schedule, and a prognosis that hung over them like a countdown clock. She refused to return to her small apartment across town. Too many stairs, the doctor said. Too isolating. Dimitri made the decision before she could argue. You're staying at my place. The penthouse has an elevator, a spare bedroom on the ground floor, 24-hour security, and enough space for Mira to run without tripping over furniture. Cassia opened her mouth to refuse, but exhaustion won. 2 weeks. Until I'm stronger. They both knew it was a lie. She wouldn't get stronger. But lies were easier than truth sometimes. The penthouse was exactly as Cassia remembered, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, minimalist furniture that cost more than most people's cars, art on the walls that belonged in museums. Cold. Beautiful. Empty. Mama, it's so big. Myra's voice echoed through the marble entryway as she spun in circles, her stuffed rabbit dangling from one hand. Dimitri watched his daughter explore with something like wonder in his eyes. He'd spent the last 3 days reading everything he could find about toddler development, child psychology, and terminal illness. Knowledge was his default response to fear. But standing here, watching Myra's delight at something as simple as an echo, he realized how little any of it had prepared him for the reality of her. The bedroom is this way, he said, leading Cassia down the hall. He'd had it prepared, a hospital bed installed, blackout curtains hung, a baby monitor on the nightstand. But he'd also added things the nurses hadn't suggested: fresh flowers on the dresser, her favorite books on the shelf, photos of Mira in simple frames. Cassia stopped in the doorway, her hand gripping the frame for support. You remembered. I remember everything. His voice was quiet. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something in her expression cracked. Dimitri, I don't. He held up a hand. Don't apologize. Don't explain. Just rest. But resting meant surrendering control, and Cassia had spent 22 months being mother, father, provider, and protector. She couldn't just stop. By the 3rd night, the forced proximity had worn them both raw. Mira had adapted with the stunning flexibility of toddlers. She followed Dimitri around the penthouse like a curious shadow, asking endless questions about everything she saw. Why was the coffee maker so loud? What did the buttons on his phone do? Why did he wear the same face when he talked to people on calls, what she called his boss face? Dimitri found himself answering with a patience he didn't know he possessed. More surprising, he found himself enjoying it. Myra's worldview was so uncomplicated, so direct. She didn't fear him. Didn't treat him with the careful deference everyone else did. To her, he was just Dimitri, the big man with sad eyes who was learning to smile. But with Cassia, every interaction was landmined with history. She'd wake at 2 a.m., trying to check on Mira, only to find Dimitri already there, sitting in the chair beside the toddler bed he'd had installed in a room adjacent to his own. She'd try to make breakfast, and he'd appear with a private chef. She'd attempt to give Mira a bath, and he'd gently but firmly take over when her hands started shaking from exhaustion. I can do it, Cassia would insist. I know you can, Dimitri would reply. But you don't have to. It was the kindness that destroyed her. The careful way he'd learned to braid Myra's hair after watching 3 YouTube videos. The fact that he'd memorized which food she'd eat and which she'd refuse. The way he'd started reading bedtime stories with the same intense focus he brought to business negotiations. On the 6th night, Cassia found him asleep in the chair beside Myra's bed, his large frame folded awkwardly, his hand resting near his daughter's small one. A storybook lay open on his lap, Goodnight Moon, read so many times the spine was cracked. She stood in the doorway, her body aching, her heart breaking in a different way than the cancer was breaking it. This was the man she'd fallen in love with. Not the controlled, distant crime lord, but the one underneath, who felt everything so intensely he had to armor himself just to survive it. You're going to hurt your neck sleeping like that, she whispered. Dimitri's eyes opened immediately, alert in the way of men who'd learned to wake ready for violence. But when he saw her, something in his posture softened. She had a nightmare, he said quietly, careful not to wake Mira. About you disappearing. I told her I wouldn't leave until she fell back asleep. Cassia's hand went to her mouth, trying to hold back the sob. She has them often. I used to. I know. She told me. About how you'd sing the song about the sparrow. You didn't. I can't sing. A ghost of a smile. I hummed. Badly. But it worked. Cassia moved into the room, lowering herself carefully onto the edge of Myra's bed. Her daughter slept peacefully now, her face angelic in the soft glow of the night light. "I was wrong," Cassia said finally, her voice barely audible. "To keep her from you. I told myself I was protecting her, but I think I was just punishing you. For choosing the life over me. Over us." Dimitri leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "You weren't wrong. I wasn't safe. I'm still not safe, Cassia. My world is violence and compromises and blood on expensive suits. But," he looked at Mira, "but I want to be. For her. I need to be." "People don't change, Dimitri. Not really. Then I'll learn to be better at hiding what I am." His eyes met hers, fierce and desperate. "I'll build walls around her so high that nothing touches her. That's exactly what I'm afraid of." Cassia reached out, her hand trembling, and touched his face. He froze at the contact. "You can't protect her from life. You can't control every variable. You have to let her be messy and make mistakes and get hurt sometimes. That's what love is. It's terrifying and uncontrolled, and you can't manage it with spreadsheets and contingency plans. I don't know how to do that." "Neither do I." Cassia's thumb brushed his cheekbone, feeling the tension there. "But maybe we figure it out together. For whatever time there is." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to fully examine. Dimitri turned his face into her palm, a gesture so vulnerable it made her breath catch. "I'm afraid, Cassia. I'm afraid of losing her. Of failing her. Of being exactly the father she deserves not to have. And I'm afraid of leaving her." Cassia's voice broke. "Of not being there for her first day of school or her first heartbreak or her wedding day. Of becoming just a memory that fades. But most of all, I'm afraid of leaving her with someone who'll turn her into something hard and cold to keep her safe." "I won't," Dimitri promised, his voice rough. "I swear to you I won't." "Then prove it." Cassia's hand dropped from his face. "While I'm still here to see it. Show me the man I fell in love with. The one who knew how to be soft. Because that's who she needs. Not the boss. Not the king. Just her father." Dimitri looked at her for a long moment, then at their sleeping daughter. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight of decision. "Okay. Teach me." The teaching began in small, awkward increments. Cassia showed Dimitri how Mira liked her toast cut into triangles, not squares. How she needed exactly 3 stories before bed, no more, no less. How she was terrified of the vacuum cleaner, but fascinated by thunderstorms. The minutiae of their daughter's world, passed from mother to father like sacred knowledge. But it was the things Cassia didn't say that haunted the spaces between them. On the 9th night, Dimitri found her in the kitchen at midnight, staring at a bottle of prescription pills with an expression he couldn't read. "The pain?" he asked quietly. She nodded, not looking at him. "It's getting worse. The doctors said it would." He moved closer, taking the bottle gently from her hands and reading the label. "Oxycodone. Heavy doses. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you'll try to fix it. You'll call more specialists, push for treatments I've already declined, make it about fighting instead of accepting. Accepting that you're dying." He couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. "You want me to just watch it happen?" "I want you to be present for it." Cassia finally looked at him, her eyes exhausted. "There's a difference." Dimitri set the pills on the counter and did something he hadn't allowed himself since she'd come back into his life. He pulled her into his arms, carefully, mindful of how fragile she'd become. She stiffened for a moment, then surrendered, her forehead dropping to his chest. "Tell me about when she was born," he said into her hair. "I need to know." Cassia was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, slowly, the story came. It was January 14th. 2 months after the divorce was final. I was living in a studio apartment in the South End, working 2 jobs because pride wouldn't let me touch the settlement money. I'd been hiding the pregnancy under loose clothes and denial. Her voice was distant, remembering. I went into labor during a night shift at the diner. Thought it was just back pain until my water broke in the middle of the dinner rush. Dimitri's arms tightened around her. A waitress I barely knew drove me to the hospital. I labored for 19 hours alone. No family, no friends, just nurses who were kind but busy. And the whole time, all I could think was, I should call him. He should be here. This is his daughter. She pulled back slightly to look at him. But then I remembered the last fight we had, the night before I left. Dimitri's jaw clenched. He remembered it too. Every word. You'd come home at 3 a.m. with blood on your shirt. Not yours. You wouldn't tell me whose. And when I begged you to stop, to leave that life, to choose us, you said. I said there was no us without the life, Dimitri finished, his voice hollow. That everything I'd built was to protect you. That you were being naive and ungrateful. You said I didn't understand sacrifice. Cassia's eyes were bright with tears. That men like you made hard choices so women like me could live soft lives. As if I'd asked for any of it. As if I wanted to be something protected instead of someone partnered with. I was wrong. You were terrified. Cassia's hand came up to rest on his chest, over his heart. I understand that now, in a way I couldn't then. You'd grown up with nothing, fought for everything, and the idea of losing it, losing me to your enemies, to the violence you trafficked in, it paralyzed you. So you tried to control it all. Keep me in a gilded cage where nothing could touch me. But I lost you anyway, Dimitri said quietly. Because the cage was suffocating you. Yes. She paused. So when Mira was born and they put her in my arms, this tiny perfect thing with your eyes, I made a decision. I would give her what I couldn't have with you. Freedom. Normalcy. A life where she didn't wake up wondering if her father would come home, or if he'd be arrested or killed, or turned into someone unrecognizable. You should have told me. There was no anger in Dimitri's voice now, just profound grief. I would have. What? Left the organization? Walked away from everything? We both know that's not how it works. You've said it yourself. Men in your position don't retire. They die or they're destroyed. Dimitri had no answer to that. Because she was right. They stood there in the kitchen, the city lights casting long shadows, holding each other like survivors of a shipwreck. There's something else, Cassia said finally, her voice very small. Something I need to tell you before I can't anymore. Dimitri pulled back to look at her face. What? The cancer. It's not bad luck or random chance. She swallowed hard. 3 years ago, I was exposed to something. A chemical fire in the building where I was working. I got out, but the smoke, the doctors think that's what triggered it. The mutations. The cells turning wrong. Horror dawned slowly. Where were you working? A warehouse in the industrial district. I was doing inventory for a logistics company. I didn't know what was really stored there until it was too late. Her eyes met his. It was one of yours, Dimitri. One of your fronts. The fire started when a deal went bad and someone tried to burn the evidence. The world stopped. Dimitri's hands fell away from her as if he'd been burned. No. No, that's not. I would have known. I would have been told. You were told there was a fire. You were told it was contained. You were told there were no casualties. Cassia's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. I wasn't important enough to mention. Just another employee of a shell company, caught in the crossfire of your world. Cassia, his voice broke. I'm not telling you this to hurt you, she said quickly. I'm telling you because you need to understand. Your choices have consequences. They ripple out beyond what you can control or predict. And Mira, she's the consequence of love, but she's also living proof that we couldn't make it work inside that world. Dimitri backed away, his hand coming up to his mouth. The magnitude of it was suffocating. He hadn't just failed Cassia. He'd killed her. Slowly, unknowingly, but killed her nonetheless. He couldn't finish the sentence. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, out of the penthouse, into the elevator and out into the night. He walked for hours through the city he controlled, seeing it differently now. Every corner, every deal, every compromise, they all had faces. Cassia's face. Myra's face. The faces of people he'd never see who paid the price for his empire. When he finally returned at dawn, Cassia was asleep in her room, exhausted from the truth-telling. But on the kitchen counter, she'd left a note. "I forgave you the moment Mira was born. I just needed you to know what you were asking me to forgive. Now teach our daughter to be better than we were. Teach her that love doesn't require cages. That's all I want. That's all I've ever wanted." Dimitri stood in his immaculate kitchen as the sun rose over the city, and for the first time in 22 months, he let himself weep. The revelation changed something fundamental between them. Not immediately, change never happened that cleanly. But in the days that followed, Dimitri stopped performing competence and started admitting confusion. Stopped trying to manage Cassia's illness and started simply being present for it. He learned to sit with her during the bad hours, the ones where pain made conversation impossible and all she could do was breathe through it. He'd hold her hand and say nothing, because he was finally learning that silence could be support instead of distance. Mira sensed the shift without understanding it. She started calling him Daddy instead of Dimitri, the word coming naturally one morning when he was making her breakfast. "Daddy, the eggs are too jiggly," she'd announced, wrinkling her nose. Dimitri had frozen, the spatula halfway to her plate. The word had detonated something in his chest, joy and terror in equal measure. "I'll make them more firm," he managed, his voice rough. From the doorway, Cassia had watched with tears streaming down her face, happy ones for once. 2 weeks into their forced proximity, Cassia was having a good day. The pain was manageable, her energy higher than it had been in weeks. She found Dimitri in his office, staring at his computer screen with the particular intensity he brought to problems that confounded him. "What are you doing?" she asked. He looked up, caught. "Research. On tea parties." He said it so seriously that she almost laughed. "Mira asked if we could have one this afternoon. I've never attended a tea party. I'm trying to understand the protocols." This time Cassia did laugh, the sound rusty from disuse but genuine. "Dimitri, there are no protocols. She's 3. You just sit on the floor, pretend to drink from tiny cups, and compliment her stuffed animals. That seems inefficient." "It's supposed to be." Cassia moved into the office, lowering herself carefully into the chair across from him. "That's the point. It's play. It's purposeless and perfect." Dimitri studied her face, taking in the color the laughter had brought to her cheeks. "I've forgotten how to do purposeless things." "Then it's time you remembered." The tea party happened that afternoon in Myra's room, which had been transformed over 2 weeks from a generic guest space into a child's kingdom. Stuffed animals lined the walls. Picture books overflowed from a small bookshelf. An art table was covered in crayon drawings, mostly of 3 figures, one big, one medium, one small, holding hands under a smiling sun. Dimitri folded his large frame onto the floor, his knees nearly to his chest, and accepted the plastic teacup Mira handed him with the same seriousness he brought to business deals. "This is Mr. Rabbit," Mira introduced, holding up her stuffed companion. "He likes sugar in his tea. Lots of sugar." "Hello, Mr. Rabbit," Dimitri said gravely. Cassia, propped against pillows on Myra's bed, watched this with something dangerously close to hope unfurling in her chest. The mighty Dimitri Kovač, who commanded empires, now taking instructions from a toddler about proper tea-pouring technique. "No, Daddy, you have to use your pinky." Mira demonstrated, her tiny pinky finger stuck out comically. Dimitri adjusted his grip, his massive hand making the toy cup look absurd. "Like this." "Perfect." Mira beamed. They played for an hour, an eternity in toddler time, and somewhere in the middle of it, something miraculous happened. Dimitri forgot to be afraid. Forgot to plan 3 steps ahead. Forgot everything except the sound of his daughter's laughter and the warmth of this absurd, perfect moment. When Mira finally tired and crawled into Cassia's lap for a rest, Dimitri stayed on the floor, watching them. Mother and daughter, curled together like nesting dolls, Myra's dark curls mixing with Cassia's as she drifted toward sleep. "You're good at this," Cassia said softly, her hand stroking Myra's hair in rhythmic patterns. "At tea parties. At being her father." Cassia's eyes met his. "I thought you'd try to parent the way you run your business, all strategy and control. But you're not. You're just loving her. Simply. Completely." Dimitri felt his throat tighten. "She makes it easy." "No, she doesn't. Loving someone this much when you know you could lose them, that's the hardest thing in the world." Cassia's voice dropped to a whisper. "I should know." The moment stretched between them, heavy with meaning. In Cassia's lap, Mira snored softly, oblivious to the adult complexity swirling around her. "I need to tell you something," Dimitri said finally. "I've been making arrangements." Cassia tensed. "What kind of arrangements?" "Legal ones. Trust funds, educational provisions, security details, everything Mira will need after," he couldn't say it. "But also something else. I've started the process of stepping back from the organization." Cassia's eyes widened. "Dimitri, you said." "I said men in my position don't retire. And they don't. But they can transition. Move operations to legitimate enterprises, distance themselves from the violent aspects, become something closer to legal." He leaned forward. "It'll take time. Years, maybe. And I'll never be completely clean. But I can be cleaner. For her. So when she's old enough to ask what her father does, I won't have to lie as much." Tears spilled down Cassia's cheeks. "You're serious?" "I've already met with my lawyers. Started selling off the worst holdings. It's going to make me enemies, but..." He stopped, corrected himself. "But that's my problem to solve. Not hers to inherit." Cassia shifted Mira gently, laying her down on the bed and covering her with a blanket. Then she moved to where Dimitri sat on the floor, lowering herself beside him with difficulty. "I was so angry at you for so long," she said. "For choosing that life. For choosing power over us. But watching you now with her, I think I understand something I couldn't before." "What?" "You didn't choose power over love. You chose power because you thought it was love. You thought protection and control and building walls were the same as devotion." She took his hand. "But they're not. And you're finally learning the difference." Dimitri looked down at their joined hands, his scarred and stained with years of violence, hers small and thin and dying. "I'm learning it too late." "You're learning it exactly when you needed to." Cassia squeezed his hand weakly. "And you'll teach it to her. That's what matters. You'll teach Mira that love is brave, not controlling. That it's about trust, not fear. That it means letting people be free, even when it terrifies you." "I'm still terrified." "Good." Cassia's smile was sad but genuine. "That means you're doing it right." They sat there together on the floor of their daughter's room, surrounded by stuffed animals and crayon drawings, and for a brief shining moment, they were a family again. Not the broken version from before. Something new. Something forged from honesty and acceptance and the particular courage it takes to love someone when you know time is running out. "Cassia," Dimitri said quietly, "I need you to know, I never stopped loving you. Even when I drove you away. Even when I was too proud and stupid to chase after you. You were always." "I know," she interrupted gently. "I never stopped either. That's why it hurts so much." He turned to look at her, this woman he'd failed in every way that mattered, who was still somehow giving him grace he didn't deserve. "If I could go back." "You can't. Neither can I." She touched his face, her palm cool against his skin. "But we have now. However much of it there is. Let's not waste it on regret." So they didn't. They sat together in the quiet of Myra's room, holding hands like teenagers, and let themselves have this one perfect afternoon before the world came crashing back in. The collapse came on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks into their fragile new normal. Dimitri had left early for a meeting he couldn't reschedule, the final negotiation to sell off his most problematic holdings. He'd kissed Myra's forehead as she slept, squeezed Cassia's hand in silent promise, and walked out believing he'd return to find them exactly as he'd left them. He returned to paramedics and chaos. Cassia had collapsed in the bathroom, unconscious before she hit the tile. Mira had been the one to find her, her small voice screaming for help until the security guard heard and called 911. By the time Dimitri arrived at the hospital, Mira was with Alexei in the waiting room, her face streaked with tears, her stuffed rabbit clutched so tightly its ear was tearing at the seam. "Daddy." She launched herself at him, and he caught her, holding her against his chest as she sobbed. "Mama won't wake up. I tried and tried, but she won't wake up." "I know, Malishka. I know." His voice was steady even as his world shattered. "The doctors are helping her." But when Dr. Ramirez finally emerged, her face told him everything before her words did. "The cancer has progressed faster than we anticipated. Her liver is failing. She's conscious now, but," the doctor's voice was gentle, "you should bring your daughter in to say goodbye." The word landed like a bullet. Goodbye. Dimitri had faced death 100 times in his life. Had ordered it, witnessed it, barely escaped it himself. But nothing had prepared him for this, walking his 3-year-old daughter down a hospital corridor to say goodbye to her mother. Cassia looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, tubes and wires connecting her to machines that beeped with mechanical indifference. But when she saw Mira, her face transformed with love so fierce it hurt to witness. "Come here, baby girl," she whispered. Dimitri lifted Mira onto the bed, carefully arranging her beside Cassia. Then he stepped back, giving them space, even though everything in him wanted to hold them both and refused to let go. "Mama sick?" Mira asked, her voice very small. "Yes, sweetheart. Very sick. The doctors will fix you." Cassia's eyes filled with tears. "Not this time, baby. Sometimes bodies get too tired to keep going." Mira processed this with the literalness of children. "Like when I'm tired and need to sleep?" "Something like that." Cassia stroked her daughter's hair, memorizing the feel of it. "But I need you to remember something very important, okay? Can you remember for me?" Mira nodded solemnly. "I love you more than all the stars in the sky. And even when you can't see me anymore, I'm still loving you. Always. Do you understand? Like hide and seek? You're hiding but still there." "Exactly like that." Cassia's voice broke. "And Daddy's going to take such good care of you. He loves you so much." Mira turned to look at Dimitri, who stood frozen by the door, his face a mask of controlled devastation. "Daddy has sad eyes again." "He does," Cassia agreed. "Because saying goodbye is hard. But you're going to help each other, aren't you? You're going to be brave together." "I'm brave like you, Mama." "You're braver than me, baby. You're the bravest person I know." They stayed like that for an hour, Cassia singing the Sparrow song in a voice that grew weaker with each verse, Mira curled against her mother like she could hold her here through sheer force of will. Finally, when Mira had cried herself into exhausted sleep against Cassia's chest, Dimitri approached the bed. "I can't do this without you," he said, his voice raw. "I don't know how to." "Yes, you do." Cassia reached for his hand with what little strength remained. "You've already been doing it. The tea parties, the braids, the way you read to her like every word matters. That's exactly what she needs." "It's not enough. It's everything." Cassia squeezed his hand weakly. "Promise me something. Promise me you'll let her be messy and make mistakes. Promise you won't build walls around her so high she can't breathe. Promise me you'll teach her that love means letting people be free." "I promise." The words came out broken. "And promise me," Cassia's eyes locked on his. "Promise me you'll forgive yourself. For all of it. I have. I need you to." Dimitri couldn't speak. Could only nod as tears finally broke through the armor he'd maintained for so long. "I love you," Cassia whispered. "I never stopped. Even when I hated you, I loved you." "I love you," he managed. "I'm so sorry I—" "Sure. No apologies. Just promise me you'll live. Really live. Not just survive or control or plan." Live with her. Be present for every messy, beautiful, terrifying moment. I will. I swear it. Cassia smiled, her hand going slack in his. Then that's enough. That's more than enough. She slipped away an hour later with Mira sleeping against her chest and Dimitri holding her hand, his forehead pressed to their joined fingers, memorizing the weight of her one last time. The funeral was small. Dimitri had wanted to give Cassia something grand, but he'd learned enough to know she would have hated that. So instead there were flowers, hundreds of white roses, her favorite, and soft music, and people who had actually known her speaking about the woman she'd been, not the wife of a crime lord or the mother who died too young, but Cassia herself. Mira sat in Dimitri's lap through it all, quiet in that unsettling way of children processing trauma. She didn't cry. Just held Mr. Rabbit and stared at the photograph of her mother with those gray-green eyes that saw too much. Afterward, back at the penthouse that felt emptier than ever, Mira finally spoke. Mama's not hiding anymore, is she? Dimitri knelt before his daughter, taking her small hands in his large ones. No, Malishka. She's not. Where did she go? He could have given her easy platitudes about heaven or angels. But Cassia had asked him to be honest, to be present, to teach their daughter that love meant trust. I don't know exactly, he said carefully. But I know she's not hurting anymore. And I know she loved you so much that love doesn't just disappear. It stays with us. In here. He touched Myra's chest, over her heart. Every time you're brave or kind or silly, that's her, still with you. Mira considered this. Will you disappear too? No. The word was fierce, absolute. I'm here. I'm staying. You're stuck with me, even when you're a teenager and think I'm embarrassing. What's a teenager? Despite everything, Dimitri almost smiled. Ask me in 10 years. The days that followed were impossibly hard. Mira woke, crying for her mama. Dimitri discovered that toddler grief was a tsunami that came in waves, fine one moment, destroyed the next. He learned to hold her through the storms, to sing the sparrow song even though his voice cracked on every note, to let her be sad without trying to fix it. He kept his promises. All of them. He completed the transition out of his criminal empire, taking losses that would have been unthinkable a year ago because Myra's future mattered more than his pride. He hired a nanny, then fired her when Mira asked if Dimitri was going to disappear too. He'd been delegating too much, falling back into old patterns. He learned to braid hair properly, to negotiate with a 3-year-old about vegetable consumption, to have tea parties without needing to research protocols first. And slowly, painfully, impossibly, they healed. Not completely. Grief didn't work that way. But they learned to carry it together, father and daughter, building a life from the rubble of everything that had broken. 6 months after Cassia's death, on a morning bright with spring sunshine, Mira was drawing at her art table when she looked up at Dimitri with sudden clarity. Daddy. Yes, Malishka. I think Mama was right. You don't have sad eyes anymore. Dimitri set down the email he'd been reading, a legitimate business proposal, nothing that would make his daughter ashamed, and really looked at his child. This miracle he didn't deserve, but would spend his life being worthy of. You know what? He said softly. I think you're right. Because somewhere between tea parties and bedtime stories, between honoring Cassia's memory and building a future Mira could be proud of, Dimitri Kovač had learned what his wife had tried to teach him all along. Love wasn't control. It wasn't walls or power or protection. It was presence. It was trust. It was the terrifying courage of letting someone matter more than your own fear. It was messy and imperfect and free. And it was the only thing worth living for. Outside, spring bloomed across the city. Inside, a father and daughter drew pictures of sparrows, and the love that remained was enough to build a whole new world.